The courthouse in downtown Los Angeles buzzed with tension. The corruption trial of the year had just concluded, and Judge Steven Siegel, known for his firm yet fair judgments, stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. He wore his signature black judicial robe, sunglasses shielding his eyes, and a calm expression on his face. For weeks, the press had been waiting for this moment. His ruling had shaken powerful people, and everyone wanted a glimpse of the man who dared to stand up to them. Steven descended the marble steps slowly, a briefcase in one hand, his security aide walking close behind. Reporters shouted questions. "Judge Siegel, any comment on the verdict?" But he simply nodded politely, choosing silence over spectacle. Just as he reached the bottom of the steps, a commotion broke out near the parking area. His driver, a middle-aged man named Carlos, was being confronted by a uniformed police officer. The officer, Dan Miller, barked orders harshly. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Carlos raised his hands, confused. "Officer, this is Judge Siegel's car. I work for him." Before he could finish, Miller cut him off. "I said hands up." "Don't talk back." Hearing the shouting, Steven turned toward the scene. Calmly but firmly, he walked over. "Officer," he said, "what seems to be the problem?" Miller barely glanced at him. "Stay out of this, sir. I'm handling a suspect." Siegel's brow furrowed. "That man works for me. He's done nothing wrong." The cop stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You his lawyer or something?" "No," Siegel replied evenly. "I'm his employer, and I'd appreciate it if you lowered your voice." That tone, steady, authoritative, only seemed to irritate the officer further. "You don't tell me how to do my job," Miller snapped, pointing a finger at Siegel. Reporters nearby turned their cameras toward the confrontation. The energy shifted instantly. People began whispering. Some recognized the face beneath the sunglasses, but others just saw an older man being talked down to by a cop. The air thickened with tension as Siegel remained still, his eyes fixed on the officer. What happened next outside that courthouse left everyone frozen in disbelief. The tense silence outside the courthouse felt heavy enough to crush the air. Dozens of bystanders had stopped to watch the standoff unfold. Cameras were already rolling. Every reporter within range sensed a story was about to break wide open. Officer Dan Miller's face twisted with irritation. He had no clue who he was talking to. To him, Steven Siegel was just another man in a dark robe trying to get involved where he didn't belong. "I said back away." Miller barked again, his hand resting on his holster. Siegel didn't flinch. His calm, almost measured tone carried a quiet authority. "Officer, you're making a mistake. That man isn't a suspect. He's my driver. We just left a federal hearing." But the officer wasn't listening. His voice grew louder, fueled by a toxic mix of pride and prejudice. "You people always have an excuse, don't you?" Those words cut through the crowd like a blade. Murmurs spread instantly. Some people exchanged glances. Others lifted their phones higher to make sure they were recording everything. Siegel's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly. He'd spent decades in law enforcement himself, and he knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about procedure, this was about ego. "I'm not going to argue with you," Siegel said evenly. "But I suggest you check your attitude before this gets worse," Miller sneered. "Are you threatening me, old man?" Reporters gasped audibly. One of them whispered, "Does he even know who that is?" Another replied, "He's about to find out the hard way." Siegel raised one hand slightly, motioning for calm. "Nobody's threatening anyone. Let's keep this civil. Show some respect, that's all I'm asking." But Miller stepped forward again, chest puffed out, his tone dripping with contempt. "Respect? You earn that. And right now you're interfering with police business." The driver, Carlos, spoke up timidly. "Officer, please, he's Judge Steven Siegel. This is all a misunderstanding." "Judge?" Miller scoffed loudly. "You think I'm stupid enough to believe that?" "He's no judge. He looks like he just walked out of a kung fu movie." That insult drew gasps from the crowd, and quiet chuckles from a few who knew exactly how ironic it was. Siegel took a slow breath, his voice low but firm. "Son, I've spent my life serving justice. I won't let you humiliate innocent people in front of me. You will treat him and everyone here with respect." The officer's face flushed red, his pride cracking. "You think you can talk down to me? I don't care who you are." Reporters shouted questions now, sensing the story exploding before their eyes. "Officer, are you aware that's Judge Siegel?" Sir, why are you detaining his driver? Judge, do you plan to file a complaint? Miller snapped. Back off. Everyone back off, waving his arms wildly as though the crowd was the problem, not his behavior. The situation was spiraling. The courthouse steps, moments ago filled with journalists and lawyers, now felt like a battleground. Siegel's aide whispered, Sir, let's just step inside. Let it go. But Siegel shook his head slightly. No, this isn't about me. It's about right and wrong. If I walk away, he'll do this to someone else tomorrow. The camera zoomed in closer. His words carried weight, calm but powerful, filled with moral gravity. Miller kept shouting, trying to reassert control, but his voice was cracking under the pressure. I said I need ID now. Siegel reached into his robe slowly, holding up his official identification card, the golden seal glinting in the light. Here's your ID, officer, he said, handing it over. Take a closer look before you dig a deeper hole. Miller snatched the card, looked down, but didn't even process it. He tossed it back dismissively. Fake, I've seen plenty of these. You're not fooling me. The audience couldn't believe it. Gasps turned into mutters. One man said loudly, That's a federal badge. Is this guy blind? Still, Siegel didn't lose his composure. His patience was extraordinary. The kind of discipline that comes from years of martial arts and courtroom decorum. He took a step closer, voice soft yet commanding. You wear that badge to protect people, not to intimidate them. Remember your oath? The crowd fell completely silent. Every camera, every lens, every eye was locked on the two men. For the first time, a flicker of doubt flashed across Officer Miller's face. But only for a second. He quickly replaced it with forced aggression, pointing a finger inches from Siegel's chest. You better walk away before I arrest you for obstruction. Siegel didn't move. His silence was louder than words. The officer's own insecurity was now on full display for the world to see. The growing tension hung thick in the air. Somewhere, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, maybe a call from the courthouse security desk. Siegel turned slightly toward the cameras and said quietly, This is what happens when power loses respect. The moment hit hard. The crowd murmured again, phones capturing every second. If you were in Stephen's place, how would you react? Stay calm or defend yourself? And from which country and city are you watching this story? Let us know in the comments below. The confrontation was far from over. The crowd could sense it. The storm hadn't even peaked yet. Next would come the shove. The insult. And something no one on those courthouse steps would ever forget. The crowd had grown thicker by the minute. Phones were raised. Microphones pointed and whispers ran wild across the courthouse plaza. Everyone could feel that something serious was about to erupt. Something that would be replayed millions of times before the day was over. Officer Dan Miller's face was red with rage and embarrassment. He wasn't used to being questioned, and certainly not by a man who stood as still and composed as Steven Siegel. Every second that passed chipped away at his pride. I said, back off. Miller yelled again, his voice cracking slightly. Siegel didn't move. He kept his hands visible, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around him. Officer, he said, voice low but firm, you're out of line. You've made your point. Now let the man go. That sentence hit Miller like a slap. His hand shot out, shoving Siegel's shoulder hard enough to make the crowd gasp. Reporters shouted in shock. Cameras clicked furiously. Whoa! Did he just push a judge? Someone shouted from the steps. Siegel barely moved, his balance steady. He straightened his robe, eyes cold but composed. Don't do that again, he said simply. But the cop's pride had blinded him. What are you gonna do, huh? You think that robe makes you untouchable? The driver, Carlos, tried to intervene. Officer, please, but was met with a sharp elbow that sent him stumbling backward. That was it. The murmurs in the crowd turned into outrage. Hey, leave him alone, a woman yelled. He's not resisting, another shouted. A few stepped closer, but Siegel lifted a hand, silently signaling them to stop. He didn't want anyone else hurt. Officer, Siegel said, his tone deeper now, a quiet warning. You're making a big mistake. Miller smirked, his insecurities bubbling to the surface. You think you can scare me with that old tough guy act? Not today. He reached for Siegel's arm again, trying to twist it behind his back. But before he could even make contact, Siegel took a half step back, enough to avoid the grip without aggression. His movements were smooth, almost instinctive, years of discipline showing through. "Don't touch me again," Siegel warned. His eyes, usually calm and kind, now burned with restrained fire. The tension was unbearable. Reporters shouted questions. People screamed for the officer to stop. A few courthouse security guards rushed toward the scene, but Miller barked at them. "Stay back. This is my arrest." The absurdity of it all, a city police officer arresting a federal judge, had everyone speechless. One journalist muttered, "He's finished. He doesn't even realize who he's touching." Still, Siegel didn't retaliate. His code wouldn't allow him to strike unless it was absolutely necessary. Instead, he stood tall, hands open and voice steady. "You're disrespecting your uniform, son. That badge represents justice and not hate." Miller's face twisted into a sneer. "Don't lecture me," he snapped, then shoved Siegel again, harder this time. The impact made him take a step back. That's when it happened. A ripple of voices spread through the crowd. "Wait, is that Judge Steven Siegel?" "Yeah, the action star, the federal judge now. Does this cop even know who he's messing with?" The noise grew louder. Reporters confirmed it on air, shouting into their microphones. "Breaking news. This officer just physically assaulted Judge Steven Siegel outside the courthouse." Miller froze for a split second. His eyes darted between Siegel and the crowd. He realized too late that every phone, every camera, every lens was aimed directly at him. His aggression had turned into a national scandal in real time. You set me up," he stammered. Siegel's expression didn't change. "No, officer. You set yourself up." The crowd erupted, cheers, anger, disbelief. Some shouted for Miller's arrest. Others called for backup. The sound of sirens approached fast. Courthouse security had finally called for reinforcements. But the damage was done. Miller, humiliated and panicked, reached for his weapon out of pure instinct, not logic. Gasps filled the air. Reporters dove for cover. Siegel didn't move. His voice cut through the chaos like steel. "Don't you dare." Miller's hand trembled on the holster. For a moment he hesitated, realizing the gravity of what he was doing. The trembling turned into rage again. "I said you're under arrest." Siegel shook his head slightly, disappointment clear in his eyes. "You've already arrested yourself, son." Then something incredible happened. The crowd began to chant softly, growing louder with every second. "Justice, justice, justice." The sound echoed through the courthouse plaza, shaking Miller to his core. His confidence crumbled. Just then, federal security agents pushed through the crowd, shouting for everyone to stand back. Their radios crackled, voices urgent. "FBI is on site, repeat, FBI is on site." The crowd erupted again. Everyone could sense it. This was no longer just a scuffle. This was about to turn into something far more serious. Miller took one final step toward Siegel, his voice trembling but defiant. "I don't care who you are. You're coming with me." Siegel didn't move, didn't speak. His silence said it all, calm, unbroken, unshaken. "If you were standing there as a bystander, would you step in to protect Judge Siegel or stay quiet and record? Comment below. Your answer might surprise you." The moment before the storm had arrived. The officer's next move would change everything. For him, for Siegel, and for the nation watching. The air around the courthouse felt heavy, like the calm before a thunderstorm. People stood frozen, phones still raised, afraid to even blink. What had started as a case of mistaken identity was now a national spectacle, with Judge Steven Siegel at its center. The racist officer, Dan Miller, was sweating now, his hand still hovering near his weapon. He could feel hundreds of eyes burning into him, but he couldn't back down, not after going this far. His pride wouldn't let him. His career, his authority, his image, all of it was slipping through his fingers. "Put your hands behind your back." Miller barked again, voice cracking. Siegel didn't move. His presence was so calm it was unnerving. He stood tall, eyes locked on the officer. "You've made enough mistakes for one day, son." "Don't make another," the crowd murmured. Reporters whispered updates into their microphones, trying to keep up with the chaos unfolding. The tension was unbearable, like watching a fuse burn toward a stick of dynamite. A woman in the front row shouted, "He's a judge. You're assaulting a federal judge. Stop before you ruin your life." Miller's jaw clenched. "I don't care who he is." "Nobody disrespects me." That's when one of the courthouse security guards stepped forward, finally unable to stay silent. "Officer, that man is Judge Steven Siegel, former federal marshal, former Navy consultant. You need to step down, now. The words hit Miller like a bullet. His entire body went stiff. What did you just say? Judge Steven Siegel, the guard repeated, voice shaking. He's not just any judge, he's a decorated lawman. You're way out of line. The crowd gasped in unison. People began murmuring louder, pointing at Siegel, some recognizing him as the movie star turned law enforcer. Oh my God, it is him. He worked with the FBI. That cop's done for. Miller's face went pale. His grip on his weapon faltered for a second. He looked at Siegel like a man realizing the ground beneath him had disappeared. But instead of apologizing, instead of backing off, his pride flared one last time. I don't care who you are, he hissed. You don't tell me how to do my job. Siegel sighed softly, that same patient exhale that had preceded countless confrontations in his life. Then maybe you shouldn't wear the badge at all, he said quietly. The officer's rage exploded. I said, you're under arrest. He screamed, and this time he drew his weapon. The entire plaza erupted in panic. Gun! He's got a gun! Someone screamed. People dove behind cars, reporters hit the ground, cameras tumbled over, but Siegel didn't move. Not an inch. His eyes stayed on the officer's trembling hand. His voice, calm and firm, carried through the chaos. You're not going to shoot anyone, son. You're scared, but fear and hate don't mix well. Miller's finger twitched near the trigger. He was sweating so hard that his hand shook uncontrollably. His training, his judgment, everything had crumbled under the weight of ego and exposure. Then, FBI, drop your weapon! The shout thundered from the left side of the plaza. 4 agents in dark tactical gear emerged, weapons drawn but steady. They moved fast, forming a semicircle behind Siegel. The crowd erupted into a roar, half relief, half disbelief. FBI's here. They're gonna stop him.
Finally.
Miller turned sharply, panic flashing in his eyes. Stay back, he yelled, swinging his gun toward the agents. That was the final mistake. Drop it now, one agent shouted again. I said stay back. Miller barked, waving the gun wildly. His finger trembled dangerously close to the trigger. Siegel even now didn't flinch. Dan, he said quietly, listen to me. It's over. You can still walk away. But the officer's world had already collapsed. He was beyond reasoning, trapped in the spiral of his own rage. His eyes darted between Siegel, the agents, and the cameras, and realizing that no matter what happened next, he was finished. He raised the gun. In that single heartbeat, that fraction of a second, Siegel made the smallest movement, stepping slightly to the side, shielding a nearby bystander behind him. 3 shots cracked through the air, then silence. Miller dropped to his knees, eyes wide, the weapon falling from his hand. Blood blossomed across his uniform as the FBI agents closed in. Suspect down. Get medical! One agent began shouting into his radio. The crowd screamed, some in shock, others in disbelief. Cameras captured every angle. Siegel stood motionless, his black judge's robe rippling in the wind. His face was solemn, no triumph, no anger, only disappointment. He slowly looked around at the terrified faces in the crowd. This is what happens, he said quietly, when hate blinds justice. One of the FBI agents placed a hand on his shoulder. Sir, we'll handle it from here. Siegel nodded once. Make sure the report tells the truth, he said, then turned toward the media frenzy forming in front of him. Reporters shouted questions. Judge Siegel, are you all right? Did you know the officer personally? Do you believe he acted out of racism? Siegel raised a hand for silence. His deep, steady voice carried across the plaza. Justice isn't about skin color or power. It's about truth. And today the truth cost a man his life. The crowd stood silent. What would you have done if you saw that officer pull his gun, run for cover, or stand beside Siegel? Tell me in the comments, I want to know how you would react. The FBI agents led Siegel back inside the courthouse as the media swarmed the scene. Sirens blared, helicopters circled above, and the world watched one of the most shocking moments in modern American justice unfold before their eyes. But for Steven Siegel, it wasn't about fame or spectacle. It was about one simple truth. Even in chaos, a real man stands calm, firm, and righteous. The sound of sirens still echoed in the distance. The plaza outside the courthouse looked like a war zone. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. News vans lined the street and shaken bystanders huddled together, whispering about what they'd just witnessed. A man had just been shot dead by the FBI. and the man he'd assaulted was Judge Stephen Siegel. Inside the courthouse, Siegel sat quietly in a private conference room. His robe was still dusted with grit from the scuffle outside. His hands rested calmly on the table, though his eyes told another story, one of deep reflection, sorrow, and quiet frustration. Across from him sat Special Agent Karen Blake, the FBI field supervisor who'd given the order to fire. Her face was composed, but there was a hint of guilt in her eyes. "Sir," she began carefully, "we reviewed the footage. The officer had his weapon raised. My men acted according to protocol." Siegel nodded slowly. "I know, Agent Blake, you did your duty. But it should never have come to this." There was a long silence, the kind that feels heavier than any sound. Blake finally said, "Judge Siegel, with all due respect," the man drew his gun in a crowded space. "You might have saved lives just by staying calm." Siegel sighed. "Maybe. Or maybe if someone had taught him what that badge truly meant, he would have never pulled it at all." Outside the courthouse, the story was already spiraling into a national storm. News outlets blasted headlines across every screen. "Breaking: FBI shoots officer. Who attacked federal judge Siegel? Siegel speaks out on racial injustice and police conduct reporters." Fought for space near the courthouse steps, each trying to capture the perfect soundbite. Protesters were beginning to gather, some in support of law enforcement, others demanding accountability. By noon, Siegel stepped out to address the media. The cameras flashed like lightning and the crowd fell silent the moment he raised his hand. He spoke slowly, clearly, every word deliberate. "What happened here today wasn't justice," he said. "It was tragedy. A man lost his life, not because of the law, but because of anger, pride, and fear." Reporters leaned forward, eager to catch every syllable. "The badge he wore," Siegel continued, "was meant to protect people. But somewhere along the way he forgot what that meant. He saw me not as a man, not as a judge, but as an enemy. And when we start seeing each other as enemies, justice dies." His voice deepened with conviction. "This isn't about me. It's about how far we've drifted from compassion, from respect. We can't let authority become arrogance." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the reporters, normally eager for drama, seemed moved by the weight of his words. One journalist called out, "Judge Siegel, do you believe the FBI did the right thing?" Siegel paused before answering. "The FBI did what they had to do. But right and wrong aren't always measured in actions. Sometimes they're measured in intention. Those agents acted to protect innocent lives. That's something that still honors the law." Another reporter shouted, "What message do you want to send to officers across the country?" Siegel looked directly into the camera lenses. "Remember the oath you took. Every time you wear that uniform, you represent justice. Not your ego, not your temper. You represent something sacred." The crowd erupted in applause. Behind the cameras, Siegel's longtime friend and bodyguard Darnell stood quietly, shaking his head. "Man, you just turned the whole country inside out," he whispered to himself. As Siegel stepped away from the podium, Agent Blake joined him. "That was powerful," she said. He nodded. "Words can calm a nation, or start a fire. Let's hope these calm it." Moments later, his phone buzzed, dozens of messages, calls, and notifications. Major news networks wanted interviews. Senators, judges, and even international leaders were weighing in. The story had gone global. Clips of the confrontation were trending across social media with captions like, "The day justice stood tall. Stephen Siegel stays calm under fire. A racist cop learns a fatal lesson." But Siegel wasn't celebrating. In his heart, there was no victory, only a reminder of how fragile peace could be. As he walked down the courthouse steps once more, he noticed a small group of children standing behind the police tape. One little boy, no older than 10, waved at him shyly. Siegel walked over, kneeling down to meet the child's eyes. "You okay, son?" he asked gently. The boy nodded. "Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. My dad's a cop." He said real heroes don't need guns, they use their words. Siegel smiled faintly, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your dad sounds like a good man. Remember what he said, and live by it." As Siegel turned back toward his car, cameras followed his every step. The image of him walking away, solemn, silent, and dignified, would soon become one of the most shared moments in modern history. If you were in Judge Siegel's place, would you forgive the officer, or demand justice to the fullest extent? Tell me what you believe real justice looks like in the comments. Back inside the car, Siegel looked out the window at the flashing lights and chaos he was leaving behind. Justice, he muttered to himself, should never come at the cost of peace. But when peace is tested, justice must stand firm, and with that, the car drove off slowly through the crowd as America continued to debate, divide, and discuss the man who had turned tragedy into a lesson for the world. The next morning, the world was still buzzing from what had happened outside that courthouse. Every news station, every social media feed, every radio station, they were all playing the same clip. Judge Stephen Siegel, calm and composed, facing down a racist cop with nothing but restraint and courage. Millions had seen the moment the officer drew his gun. Millions had seen the FBI's swift response. And millions more were now asking the same question: how did it come to this? In Washington, officials scrambled to respond. The FBI launched a full internal investigation. Though early reports made it clear that the agents had acted lawfully, the Department of Justice released a statement praising Siegel's composure under pressure, calling his actions a model of restraint and professionalism in the face of imminent danger. Meanwhile, outside in the real world, protests and vigils had erupted across major cities. Some carried signs that read, "Justice over judgment," "Respect before reaction." Be like Siegel, news anchors analyzed every frame of the video. Pundits debated whether the officer's behavior was driven by racism, ego, or fear. But one thing everyone agreed on: Siegel's calm saved lives. Inside his home that morning, Siegel sat quietly at the breakfast table sipping tea. The television in the corner played endless replays of the event. He didn't flinch when his face appeared on the screen. He'd seen violence before and fame even more. But this was different. This wasn't a movie. This was real life, and a man had died. His assistant, Maria, entered the room holding a stack of letters and emails. "Judge Siegel, you've received thousands of messages overnight, from veterans, police officers, even kids. They're thanking you for how you handled yourself." Siegel glanced at the letters, then back at the window. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he said quietly. "I just didn't let anger win." Maria smiled softly. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." Later that day, Siegel received a call from the Senate Judiciary Committee. They wanted him to testify before Congress, not just as a judge, but as a voice of reason in a nation divided over police accountability. When Siegel entered the Capitol, cameras flashed from every angle. The hearing room was packed, senators, media, and activists all eager to hear what he would say. He took his seat, adjusted the microphone, and spoke in his signature calm tone. "What happened outside that courthouse wasn't an isolated event," he began. "It's a reflection of something deeper, a sickness growing in our system, a loss of empathy." The room fell silent. "I spent my life enforcing the law," Siegel continued. "But I've learned that the law alone can't save us. Only respect can. When authority loses respect for the people it serves, that's when justice turns into tyranny." One senator leaned forward. "Judge Siegel, are you suggesting there's systemic failure in our law enforcement culture?" Siegel didn't hesitate. "I'm saying there's a failure in the human heart. Laws can guide us, but only compassion can change us." The audience burst into quiet applause. Even the senators who disagreed couldn't deny the power of his words. Outside, crowds gathered around big screens showing the live broadcast. Some were crying. Others were cheering. Across the world, millions watched a man who once played heroes on screen become one in real life. That evening, Siegel returned home to find dozens of reporters waiting at his gate. One young journalist, maybe 25, called out, "Judge Siegel, what's your message to every officer watching right now?" Siegel stopped, looked straight into the camera and said, "Remember, the badge is supposed to serve, not rule. If you forget that, you don't deserve to wear it." The clip went instantly viral, viewed over 200 million times in less than a day. Hashtags like "Stand with Siegel" and "Justice with Honor" trended worldwide. The FBI later released body cam footage from the agents that confirmed every detail. The evidence cleared Siegel completely, painting him as the picture of restraint under extreme pressure. In a rare public statement, the FBI director himself said, "Judge Siegel's conduct was exemplary. He stood firm without aggression, a model of strength through discipline." Back at home, Siegel was sitting in his garden when his longtime friend, Darnell, joined him. "You know," Darnell said with a chuckle, "you've started a movement without even trying." Siegel smirked slightly. "Movements come and go. What matters is if people actually change," Darnell nodded. "You really think they will?" Siegel looked out at the sunset. "If they don't, we'll just keep repeating the same story. Different names, same mistakes. I pray they do." Then his phone buzzed again. This time a message from the president himself. "Your words have moved the nation. The country owes you thanks, not for fighting back, but for standing tall." Siegel read the message, sighed, and placed the phone down. "The real thanks," he said quietly, "would be if no man ever has to face hate in uniform again." The sun dipped low behind the horizon, painting the sky gold. It was peaceful for the first time in days, but Siegel knew peace was fragile. He also knew the real fight wasn't against violence, but against ignorance. If you could ask Judge Siegel one question after all this, what would it be? About justice, forgiveness, or strength? Drop your question in the comments below. I'll feature the best one in the next story. As night fell, Siegel stood up and walked inside. The world might still be loud with chaos and opinion, but his heart was steady. Because true justice, he knew, was never about revenge, it was about balance. And balance always begins with calm. Days turned into weeks, but the echo of that courthouse confrontation didn't fade. It grew louder. Every news channel, social platform, and podcast kept replaying the same moment. Judge Stephen Siegel, standing tall, facing hate with calm dignity. Across the world, people debated, discussed, and reflected. But somewhere in the noise, something remarkable began to happen. A shift. Schools started teaching the video in civic classes, not as a story of violence, but as a lesson in restraint and respect. Police academies across the country began showing the footage during ethics training, labeling it the Siegel Standard. The movement was no longer about one man or one incident. It had become about what justice was supposed to be. In Los Angeles, a young rookie officer named Miguel watched the video again before his first patrol. His instructor had told him, "Watch how he doesn't fight back. That's strength. That's control." Miguel nodded, quietly repeating Siegel's words to himself. The badge is meant to serve, not rule. Across the ocean in the Philippines, Siegel's second home, crowds gathered at community centers to hold prayer vigils for peace. They saw him not as a movie star, not even as a judge, but as a symbol of honor in an age of chaos. Meanwhile, Siegel himself stayed quiet. He avoided interviews, avoided fame. He'd said what needed to be said. The rest was up to the world. One morning, weeks later, he received a handwritten letter from the mother of the officer who had been shot. The envelope was simple, unmarked. Inside, her words were raw and trembling. "Dear Judge Siegel, I lost my son that day, but I know in my heart that you tried to save him. You spoke to him like a father would. You didn't raise your hand in anger, and for that I thank you. Maybe if he had learned to listen sooner, he'd still be here. You showed the world mercy in the face of hatred. Please don't stop teaching that." Siegel read the letter in silence. When he finished, he closed his eyes and whispered, "May he rest in peace." It wasn't forgiveness he sought, it was understanding. The following week, he accepted an invitation to speak at the United Nations Peace Forum. Leaders from dozens of countries filled the Grand Hall. The theme of the event was Justice Through Peace. When Siegel stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell completely silent. Cameras rolled, lights dimmed, and the world listened. He began with the same calm voice that had become his trademark. Power without compassion is just control. Law without humanity is just words. What happened on those courthouse steps wasn't about one bad cop. It was about what happens when we forget that respect must come before authority. He paused, letting his words sink in. Justice doesn't live in courtrooms or uniforms, he continued. It lives in how we treat each other when no one is watching. The badge, the robe, the title, they mean nothing if we lose our humanity. The audience erupted into applause. Some leaders stood, others wiped away tears. Even the Secretary General leaned forward, nodding with deep respect. Siegel ended with one final message. You don't need strength to fight violence. You need discipline. You don't need power to command respect. You need character. The entire hall rose to its feet in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. That night, Siegel walked along the quiet streets of New York. The city was alive, traffic humming, lights glowing, life moving on. He looked up at the skyline and thought of how fragile peace really was. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Agent Blake. It read simply, "The world listened. Thank you, Judge." Siegel smiled faintly, typing back just 2 words, "For justice." He slipped the phone into his coat pocket, then disappeared into the crowd, just another man among millions walking in peace. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. What does justice mean to you? Is it punishment, forgiveness, or balance? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. As the screen fades to black, the narrator's final line echoes softly. In a world full of noise and anger, one man chose silence and honor. And that's how Steven Siegel reminded us all. Real strength doesn't roar. It stands still.